Thank you, Felix. Thank you. Great pleasure to introduce Becky. Becky Cook, who's a Nunapa woman from here, Quandamooka country. And Becky is a PhD and early career co-lead in the Centre for Data Science and AI at the Queensland University of Technology, and is presenting our final seminar series for the year on AI technology and its use in and how to elevate that in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health and wellbeing, I guess, or in Aboriginal affairs. So please make Becky welcome, and thank you very much for joining us this time of year. I know it's when everyone's winding down, but we're really pleased you could come and do our final seminar for the year. We saw you talk at the Oakland conference a month ago or so, so yeah, we were pretty pleased that you come and join us today. And thank you.
Thank you very much. This is the clicker. Yep. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me here this morning. Pretty much covered the first slide that I've got now in the intro, so thank you very much. I'm going to be talking a little bit around my perspectives on AI as an Aboriginal researcher, and also around the importance of Indigenous data governance within this space, and the inclusion of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and why that's important. I'm just driving two technologies today because I can't see that far. Before we begin, I do want to acknowledge the Turrbal and Yagara as the custodians of country where we're meeting today. Acknowledge that these lands were never ceded. They've always been places of teaching, research and learning. I'd also like to extend that respect and acknowledgement to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples joining us here today, and acknowledge the important role that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play in the community here in Meanjin and across the nation. Why I'm here today is I'm currently working on a number of projects in relation to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander data, including data literacy and capability, which I'm working with at 6 Brisbane to develop a data literacy framework to support engagement with the community around the data that's held. And I'm also working on a number of projects in relation to community data. And the way that I see AI is it is powered by data, which means that it is powered by information from people and knowledge is from people. And so I really want to highlight why that's important. Some other things that I'm working on is working on a community data project with the University of Melbourne, the Improving Indigenous Data Research Capability Project, which is a collaborative project from the ARDC, and another project with ATSIX around engendering agency in the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community health through responsive practice. So why are we talking about this today? And I think, the way that AI has come into this space, all of us here know, being in this research and educational environment, how quickly that it's come into being and something that we really need to be aware of. It's being embedded in universities, government departments, and in health systems without communities being, and often without communities and individuals being consulted or advised on how their data is being used within these different models. So even though language around AI is very technical, it's already influencing things like program planning, health messaging, evaluation frameworks, and even how our communities are represented in national data sets. And for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, it does raise big questions. Who controls the data? Who interprets it? And who benefits from these technologies? And so I will, if you'd like to, going to get you involved in today's session. Otherwise, you're just going to listen to me talk for 40 minutes, and I don't think anyone really wants to do that. If you'd like to jump onto the Menti, can you think about one word or a couple words you may associate with AI yourselves, either in your personal lives, work, community settings? And I'll pop those up if I can make sure the tech is good. I need to share my screen first. Those online are welcome to do this too. Yes. I love it when we can get things going. So yeah, a lot of things that are popping up in those big spaces are around the uncertainty and fear and caution in using these things. And I think they're really important things that we need to be aware of. Oh, this is good. This is some of the stuff that I'm talking about today. So I always like it when that happens too. So we've got, environment, control, risk, fear. It's always around the unknown of how things are going to play out and how they're going to be used, especially when they're in an uncontrolled environment with everyone engaging in these spaces as well. So just give that another minute if anyone else wants to pop anything in there. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks so much. Yeah. Okie dokie. So we are going to be discussing some of those things today. I'm going to give a basic explanation of the different types of AI and how they might show up in research and community health spaces. We're going to look at Indigenous data sovereignty and Indigenous data governance because, as I mentioned before, it is the data that is empowering these different models and different tools that we're all engaging with. We'll briefly touch on some frameworks for essential and ethical use of AI and some of the national community concerns, which again echo some of those things that we just popped into the Menti as well, and the deeper structural issues underneath some of those concerns relating to cultural knowledge and the environmental impacts. And we'll finish by looking at community-led opportunities and what Indigenous governance-driven data approaches to AI could potentially look like, and some steps that we can take as researchers engaging in this space or just using different AI tools as individuals as well. Okay, so basically, AI is a set of systems that learn from data. AI looks at patterns and large amount of data and uses those patterns to make predictions. It could be generating text, it could be summarizing documents, classifying information, or supporting decision making. The important thing is that AI doesn't understand meaning. It's only looking for those patterns and doing that pattern recognition within the data. And this can become a major issue when the data itself might be incomplete. It could be biased. It could be collected through potentially non-ethical ways and even shaped by colonial systems that hold the data as well. So in our health and research spaces, we do encounter a few different types of AI, and this isn't exhaustive. So predictive AI, which forecasts trends. So in community settings, it might lead to estimating service demands, program outcomes. Generative AI, which produces text summaries, things like ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot. Classification AI, which groups qualitative data, sorts themes, categorizes different types of service needs. Decision support AI. So this is things that policymakers and health or health systems may use to plan resourcing or to allocate funding. But again, just reminding ourselves that none of these are actually neutral because they're shaped by how the data is collected and interpreted. So it's equally important to be clear about what AI is not. And it's generally not something that can be considered culturally neutral. It's not objective, and it's definitely not a replacement for community knowledge or lived experience. It doesn't understand country, relationality, kinship, or social determinants of health. So if we're actively bringing Indigenous governance into these systems, if we're not actively bringing Indigenous governance into these systems, they're going to default to those assumptions on the people and the data sets that created those. So why do AI systems struggle with worldviews? And that's because it doesn't consider things as being relational. Our worldviews are grounded in community, kinship, and country, and a collective experience of health and wellbeing. The most of the data sets that AI trains on doesn't really capture this or have the ability to capture this. And in fact, many data sets may actually exclude Indigenous peoples entirely or record information in deficit-based ways or perhaps group Indigenous peoples from different places altogether. And that's related to issues around Indigenous identifiers, and then also people self-identifying or not identifying in the data sets as well. And again, we know that there's big diversity within our communities, especially between urban and remote settings. And so AI is not going to be able to pick that up by itself. So without Indigenous data governance, AI can continue to misinterpret or erase important parts of our community. That's why Indigenous voices, frameworks, and decision-making are essential in the development of these systems. So when I'm talking about Indigenous data, I'm not just talking about numbers or health records. I'm talking about things like knowledges, stories, our genealogies, language, cultural practices, environment, demographic and social information, our communities. This is because data, it carries responsibility. It is our people, it is our stories. It's relational. It has meaning because of the people, places, and histories that it's connected to. And when AI uses this data without community control, it may risk stripping away some of the context that gives it that value and meaning, and also that belonging to the communities that it was collected from. So, Mari Wingara defines Indigenous data sovereignty in Australia as the right of Indigenous people to exercise ownership over Indigenous data. Ownership of data can be expressed through its creation, collection, access, analysis, and interpretation, management, dissemination, and reuse of that data. Indigenous data sovereignty is grounded in self-determination, collective benefit, and accountability. It asks us who holds the decision-making power, who interprets the data, who benefits from it, and for AIs to be ethical, they need to consider some of these points. Onto Indigenous data governance, and it is how sovereignty is enacted. So it's more of a tangible mechanism. Mari Wingara defines it as the right of Indigenous peoples to autonomously decide how, why, and what Indigenous data are collected, accessed, and used, and it ensures that data about Indigenous peoples reflects our priorities, our values, our cultures, worldviews, and diversity. It can include community-defined rules around data access, cultural protocols for interpretation of that data, community-controlled ethics and consent, agreements for benefit sharing from research or data collection, and different mechanisms for communities to review and challenge how data is used. When governance is strong, AI can be used in ways to support community goals and priorities. When governance is weak, AI systems can easily reproduce colonial harms. So Indigenous data governance is required to keep AI aligned with community values. Because AI systems scale patterns within the data, if there's inaccuracies within the data, or if it's deficit framed or taken out of context, AI will then reproduce that in a much bigger way. So good governance asks us, does this technology serve community benefit? How is cultural context being protected? Who approves and oversees the use of the AI? What are consequences if systems do get it wrong? And without governance, AI can just become another form of that extraction from communities and extractive research. With governance, however, AI can become something that we can shape, challenge, and direct, and how it's going to be used in each of our different communities and different ways that we want to use it. So when we look across the national landscape, including work coming out of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community health organisations, different community consultations and digital inclusion projects, and also Indigenous data sovereignty networks, a very consistent picture does emerge. And these concerns emerged from some of my work with ACCHOs and also Indigenous data networks across Australia. People asking for transparency around how data is used in this, some of the things that you guys popped into the Menti before, protection against misinterpretation, clarity around secondary use, stronger community control over our cultural knowledges, better regulation on data use, and a clear pathway for community decision-making in digital and AI projects. And these aren't technical concerns, these are around that governance concern and how data is being used. Okay, so we'll get you to, if you'd like to go on to the next one. What concerns you most about AI? Oh, I need to share, sorry. No, we're on the right one. I just need to share it. Yeah, fake news is a big one. And we see some of the AI images that pop up on different social medias and different platforms. And sometimes you need to take a moment to figure out if it's a real image or an AI image and what to look out for in some of those different presentations. Yeah. Reinforcing inequality used as truth. Absolutely. Around, we need to have some of this awareness around where this information has come from, what's being presented to us. And that's something we need to take on as individuals when we're engaging with different things online now. Yeah, misrepresentation and consent. Absolutely. Privacy, bias, alternative truth. Yes. The last ones. Mainstream thinking. Okay. Thank you very much for your participation in that one. We're going to touch on some of these things in a minute, and I hope everyone's okay with my playing around with ChatGPT in a moment, because I want to unpack why some of these concerns keep arising. And as we've talked about, AI inherits the structures, the data that it's trained on. Much of Australia's administrative and health data was built through colonial administrative practices, categories, classifications, and vocabularies designed for governance or assimilation and not specifically focused on wellbeing. And so deficit language can become that ground truth, like we saw in the Menti too, around fake news and different things becoming truths. They reproduce how institutions historically may have collected data from Indigenous peoples. And so this structural legacy is what I mean when I'm talking about coloniality in data. The new National AI Plan released last week also acknowledges that AI systems can reproduce harmful power dynamics if they're not governed carefully, something communities have been raising, in every time that we're talking about data collection or research within our different spaces. And so this reinforces, again, why Indigenous data governance is essential. So onto the images, and I've got a couple of slides of some images as well. So I asked ChatGPT, create me an image of a doctor working in Australia. So straight up, it's decided that the doctor should be a white male. And I don't know about you, but I haven't been to a doctor's office with a flag in the background. This flag actually, even, I haven't put this one in there. My partner plays with ChatGPT on the train every morning and sends me like family photos of us and the dogs. Anyway, we're going to Whistler for Christmas, and he sent me a picture of us in the snow, and then he sent one of Australia Christmas, and it's still got Australian flag in the background next to a Christmas tree. So I don't know why ChatGPT is obsessed with the Australian flag. That was today, but I did this, I put these slides together before today. So I actually thought about the flag representation in terms of Australia as well, and it kind of made me think about what I could ask ChatGPT next. Again, we talked about misrepresentation and misappropriation and misrepresentation, and how it just pulls everything from the public space and remixes or reproduces it without considering what it may mean. And so without community control and Indigenous cultural intellectual property protections, this may amount to cultural extraction. Our National AI Plan also highlights the need to prevent AI from causing cultural harm. And for Indigenous peoples, that is ensuring that AI doesn't misuse ISIP or misrepresent cultural knowledge. So in this image, I probably shouldn't have gone down this path, but I did. Can you create an image representing Australia Day? I'll give you a moment to have a look, and there's a couple of things that came out to me straight away. The description it generated, no, this one. The description automatically says Australia Day celebration. That's one of the things that stood out to me. So without getting into the annual Australia Day debate, that it's assumed it's a celebration and not considered as any other perspectives. The next thing I noticed, there was no diversity amongst the crowd of people. Everyone has the same Caucasian skin tone. And yeah, I'm not really interested in the errors in the flags and any of the weird things going on with arms, because that just happens when we use ChatGPT. And I apologise, it does get worse. So I thought I'd go, next one. I thought I'd go down the rabbit hole a little bit more. And I wasn't originally going to put these up, but yeah, because I just didn't have words for that one on the left. So when I asked it, can you show me Indigenous peoples on Australia Day? It, again, assumed that it was a celebration and has pulled together, I don't know. Like I said, I don't have words. And then the second one, again, no diversity within the group of people on the right as well. And I didn't actually mention Australia Day. I just said what happens on the 26th of January in Australia. And so it's put together Australia Day events. I think you can start to see why some of these things are inappropriate with some really basic input into these. Google's AI overview did give me a little bit more of a comprehensive perspective. It did talk about Invasion Day and Survival Day when I typed in 26th of Jan. I think you can start to see why Indigenous data governance is important in this space. So this leads to epistemic justices within AI. And so the AI systems can routinely produce that testimonial injustice where community voices may be undervalued, and hermeneutic injustice where our collective concepts don't fit models of specific categories. So if a system can't interpret interpret kinship obligations or significance of things like country, it can't actually be relied upon to define things like community health and wellbeing. And again, this did pop up in the Mentee as well, because every session I do attend myself as an individual talking about AI, different models or how AI is being used. Environmental impacts are a very real thing in relation to AI. And people always ask the questions in these spaces too, because training these large models, if you're not aware, does require a huge amount of electricity and a huge amount of water for cooling data systems. And often they're not using things like recycled water, they're using fresh water supplies for these data systems. And that's unsustainable and can create real pressures on country and environment, especially when they're things connected to health and wellbeing. And there are ways that this impact can be reduced. We could potentially choose smaller, more efficient models, asking providers to use renewable energy sources, renewable water sources in these systems. And also include environmental impact checks in any project approvals in relation to AI, and building AI systems supporting community sustainability priorities rather than undermining them as well. And I do believe that environmental ethics and data ethics, they shouldn't really be separated when we're talking about AI, because it does have such significant impacts on country. On the wellbeing of our people as well when it does impact upon the environment. I would also personally encourage data governance frameworks for AI to consider environmental impacts. So hopefully people do that. Despite all these risks, which we've talked about, I know it can sound very negative. There are some meaningful opportunities if we do have Indigenous data governance and participation in design of these models and how they're used. AI can do things like support, if it's community-led, it can support things like planning, evaluation and storytelling in ways that strengthen self-determination. Examples might include community dashboards, locally defined wellbeing indicators, and language revitalisation tools. The difference is that the community defines the purpose, data, and governance, and even where these systems are built and housed. Okay, this is the last one, because we've changed the tone a little bit. Sharing. That one's not sharing. Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. I need to change the picture. There we go. Biggest opportunity for community-led AI. Sorry about that. Yes. I'm just going to stop and we'll start again.
Is it working now? Yep.
Yeah. Yay. The truth telling, opening mind, self-determination, power for community. Black education, accessibility, a voice, writing grants. Just make sure it doesn't sound like AI, because there's some pretty easy ways to determine if something's just been copied and pasted without using any of the other tools that can check for those things. If you've used it for text generation, AI likes to put in a lot of hyphens and dashes. So just, hot tip if you're using that, make sure, I don't know, in my everyday writing, I don't put a hyphen out in like every second sentence, but yeah, AI does. Yeah. So whoever designed that, they must have really liked that one. Education, control of narrative, informed evidence. Not sure. That's okay. Okay. Last chance to pop anything in there if you'd like. Assistive tools. So I don't know if anyone here has popped, potentially a document or something in there and asked for a summary and found that useful for yourself. Okay. Thank you very much for participating in the Menti. Stop sharing. That was the last one too, so thank you very much. Great, thank you. So one way we can support some of the community-led AI initiatives is by aligning with some of those relational values like reciprocity, accountability, social and emotional well-being, and cultural integrity. This means shifting from a traditional data-first thinking to a context-first thinking. So who is this empowering? What is this for? Why are we doing this? How could this potentially be used? So designing those models that start from what communities' values are, what are priorities within communities, and what different measurements make sense to those communities. And also around acknowledging what is considered to be indigenous data, because if we think back to what I showed you earlier, it's not that traditional sense of numbers and statistics and population demographics. We want to know a little bit more. So some of the capability work. So this aligns with some of the work I've been doing around data literacy and capability in the community. But we do also need capacity building more broadly, such as training community researchers, empowering different Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health services, their staff, university partners, researchers, making sure that we all have some kind of foundational, at least AI literacy and data literacy when we're engaging with these systems and using them within our workplaces as well. So we also need to engage our young people with data and technology where we can, because we're moving more into this world where we're engaging with these things so frequently. We need to make sure that our young people know how to use them and also know the risks when they're putting information into different platforms or putting their own personal stuff into things like ChatGPT and how that might be used. So this particular activity we've been doing for the last couple of years at the Queensland Murray Carnival with At6 Brisbane, where we've popped some wearable devices, the same ones that the NRL players use on the young players. So they get to wear the vest or they can have it in a pocket in their jersey. They go on, they play their rugby league matches and then can come off and see their metrics. So things like their run meters, their tackles, where they went on the field, acceleration, all of those types of things. And it's just a way that, because the kids see the professionals wearing these, they'll engage with using that, but then also talking them through some of those metrics as well, just seeing how data can be used to support their performance, and then also those ongoing impacts for health and wellbeing. And so the first year we did this event, Jared from At6 had a yarn with a young player. He was a really small fellow and he didn't want to wear the tracker at first. And there's no pressure to wear that. They don't have to. All the data is de-identified. And, Jared had this yarn with him and was like, oh, this is just for you. If you want to put it on and see how you're going. And he was like, all right, I'll do it. And went out and played the match, came back, and he was the fastest fella on the field. And you should have seen the smile on this kid's face when he realised that he actually was the fastest one. And so just seeing that data, changed his perspective and the way he went into the next game later on that day. So I think, is that all I wanted to talk about on the slide? I just talked a little bit about how, capabilities mentioned in the National AI Plan that came out last week in the Closing the Gap statement, Priority Reform 4. Actually, I probably do have that on another one now. This is why I have notes, because I just like to tell little stories. I'm going to go on to the next one. So there's already some powerful examples of Indigenous-led digital and data initiatives, and these are a couple of them, which I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about each one. So if you want to take a picture and go and Google some of these things, you can. And so these are different tools, potentially where language tools and monitoring land and water, data governance and stewardship, and they show how AI can be used as tools for community priorities when governance is in place. So the Healthy Country and AI and Digital Platform, it's designed to enable researchers, Indigenous land and sea management organisations and traditional owners to use technology to responsibly collect data and use data and AI that complements Indigenous knowledges, monitoring things like on-ground actions and contributing to Healthy Country goals. The AI GhostNet Tracker, if you've heard about that one, it's a project using drones and AI to find ghost nets along the coastlines of the NT. It's also used in sea turtle monitoring and conservation in Queensland, similar approaches, looking for tracks and things like that. The AI for healthcare in Australia, Australian Indigenous communities, is a scoping project that's just been launched from the CSIRO in collaboration with different health services as well, to see how AI could potentially support some of the community health initiatives. Couple of custom AI tools as well. So the one, I didn't put it in my notes what it was called. The one in the middle down the bottom, and I was going to put in the proper pronunciation. But it is it's a language model which was developed with a specific community in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and it supports complex decision making and policy documents being translated into a way easier for whānau to understand and to apply their own worldviews upon in the context of environmental impacts and resource extraction within their communities. So they did a demo when I was at WIPSI last month, and they put the documents from the companies into it, and then it spoke back in language back to them the different things that were meaningful for consideration. And the last one, Wasiga Kisuwatsuen, is a writing tool and artificial intelligence to assist non-Indigenous peoples in their efforts to write about Indigenous peoples. It detects bias in written text. That's developed by Métis woman Shani Gwyn in Turtle Island. She came over here and shared some of that with me for International Data Week back in October. So you can look up those as well. Next one, please. Thank you. So some other ways that we can strengthen Indigenous control in relation to AI. Again, I've gone on about governance because it's something that's really important to me, but things like Indigenous-led data sets where communities control and define what data is collected, how it's described and what context it's required in. Pairing that with community-owned digital infrastructures, ensuring data isn't housed in systems that communities don't control. And that's a big ask. Like, it is a big thing. I know, like, if you ever have opportunity to yarn with AT6 around their data strategy and the way that they've got their systems and their warehouse and everything set up, it's amazing, but it did require a huge amount of resources. But yeah, it's a wonderful, wonderful thing that they're doing. And so being able to support other communities would be really good. So Indigenous cultural intellectual property protections are essential, managed through explicit cultural permissions, licensing agreements, technical restrictions that prevent scraping of these data, and generating cultural content without authority. This includes the right to restrict sacred or sensitive knowledges from AI training, or if it's a community model, perhaps include it, but that needs to be determined by communities and how that's going to be controlled into the future. Free, prior and informed consent does underpin all of this. And so communities must be informed within clear language around what's going to happen and have time to consider those options. So really affording that time to have these conversations and consent for participation in the development of these, and options to retain the power to control the data and withdrawing consent at any stage. So earlier this year, I had the opportunity to join over 40 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander researchers, practitioners and community members at the Centre for Global Indigenous Futures at Macquarie University. And we sat down and envisioned what Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander AI futures might look like. We developed a communique which you can download. It highlights the need for AI systems that are governed locally, developed with transparency and grounded with those cultural protocols. And when these governance mechanisms work together, AI can become something that communities can guide and shape, aligned with culture and used in ways that support wellbeing rather than undermine it. Okay, so almost there. Some practical steps for researchers. So what does this actually mean if we're doing research within this space? So, a lot of us may be doing Indigenous research well, being here and having that experience, but a key difference with AI is that it requires some additional governance. Even if you have strong community relationships and ethics approval and data collection processes in place, AI can introduce some of those new risks around data use interpretation at scale and secondary uses that may require explicit consideration and discussion. So before starting, engaging Indigenous data governance specifically about AI from the design stage if possible. Many ethics frameworks, still haven't caught up with this. Also happy to yarn about ethics for anyone. I thought Stephen would be looking at me when talking about ethics. He doesn't want to know about it. And during projects, prioritise Indigenous-led data sets where they exist. So applying care principles for Indigenous data governance. So as well as the FAIR principles. So if you're not familiar with those, look up the care principles for Indigenous data governance. They were back on the Indigenous data governance slide. And specifically covering AI in any of those processes. because communities who are comfortable with traditional research methods may have concerns about how their data is used within some of these models. And so having those conversations is really important. And yeah, again, what is the critical point is that AI does scale both benefits and harms. So it can be really powerful in both good and bad ways. So relationships are key in ensuring that their data is used and continue to be used within these systems in ways which are defined by communities and ways that benefit communities. So again, yeah, back to relationships. Okay, so last one. Thank you. Last one is summary. AI is powerful, and I think that we should be included in more of these conversations, and especially in an Indigenous health and wellbeing context on how these can empower us. And the determining factor for benefiting or harming communities, in my opinion, is governance of the data that's being used and how these systems are being employed. AI must reflect community-defined values, support cultural integrity, and uphold Indigenous cultural intellectual property, because these are the core foundations that impact upon wellbeing when data is collected and used. It does also need to be environmentally responsible to make sure that our country is also protected. And when AI is guided by Indigenous data governance and community priorities, it has the potential to strengthen decision-making, improve services, and support holistic wellbeing. And universities and researchers have a responsibility to work in genuine partnership with communities, shifting power, building capability, and supporting communities to lead AI futures that enhance their health, culture, and self-determination. And thank you very much. That's just my LinkedIn if anyone wants to connect with me later. And I'll take any questions. Thank you.
In the room to start with? I'll start.
Okay.
I guess you've outlined a couple of things that at an individual level people can do to sort of take the right steps. I guess is there an onus on each individual person to make a responsible choice about which tools and platforms that they use? Is that would you say that that's a fair comment, or is it more at a systems level?
I think both. I do think as individuals, we do need to take some responsibility on what we're putting into these platforms and choosing ones which are aligned with the work that we're doing and the values that we have. Potentially, if you are wanting to use a generative tool, looking for one that has a layer of ethics behind it. So there's a tool called, I don't know how you pronounce it, but like Claude AI. It has what they call constitutional ethics. So it will consider its responses before it gives them to you based on its own code, so to speak. But again, that's still being developed by someone. So making a decision perhaps to use that rather than ChatGPT, that could be one thing. But then also as organisations, supporting ethical decision-making and data collection, especially as universities around upholding Indigenous data governance in research projects and supporting Indigenous-led research in those ethics processes around how data is managed and used is one thing that universities can do to support community having more control over that data rather than everything being housed within the university. I think I've forgotten the rest of the question, but did that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. And it just makes me think, for us, our university has a position on AI and supports use in certain ways and has policies and procedures and things. And it just makes me wonder, have the right people had a seat at the table when influencing that policy and those positions? I don't know, but it just makes me ponder.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point too. I read a article the other day in response to the national statement on AI use and around how a lot of it is around Australia looking forward and being a leader and all of those things, but consultation with researchers and people who are doing these things on the ground and seeing those impacts of data collection that was an area that wasn't as strong within that document. If you know, in your spare time over the last week, you've actually read that. So yeah, it's very important. I think those relationships are key, especially when we are considering how Indigenous data is collected and used within some of these models. Hi. Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think I think there really needs to be clear guidelines around the identification of AI generated images within media and within things that are published online, and making sure that anything that does use an AI generated image is cited in that way. So people know that this is where it's come from. I would say even putting it to the tool that created it would be useful, considering different models. It's a great question, and it's, yeah, around the copyright, but then also around how the people whose data has been used to generate that image, once it's in those models, there's no real way of tracing it back, because AI will build upon what's been put into it, to a point where it's really hard to figure out where that's come from. So yeah, I don't know, apart from rather if you're using that. I probably wouldn't. I like to make sure stuff, has attribution to where it's come from appropriately, and especially if it is something of people, making sure that they have their permission and that to be involved in that dissemination. But yeah, I think there's something, if we're doing it, we need to just clearly state that it's something that's been AI generated for now, until we get a bit more impacts on how that actually plays out. I don't know if that really answered the question. Yeah. With the doctor or? Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. 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 And even if it's not a specific person, there's still instances where images will have a likeness to somebody, even if they aren't necessarily of that image. I know there are different, I don't know if app's the right word, but different things that you can put on your images to stop AI scraping them. So it scrapes it as like a not you, like it'll be a cartoon or a weird image, but then that's something that you could put on or photographers could put on. But if, you're walking down the street and some random person takes your photo and sticks it on the internet, then there's not really anything that's not going to prevent that. There's a lot of catch up happening. And the scary thing, I think, is that AI is moving so quickly that all the policies and the procedures and regulation to protect people is so much slower. Yeah.
Can we just give Stephen the mic?
Yeah.
For those online, please? Sorry.
No, you're right. On that as well, in terms of how, because policy and legislation is so far behind, how can we protect ourselves and our communities from AI, or at least maintain or regain our own control and ownership of our data?
I think a lot of that needs to come back to that relationship and conversations with the community around how data is being collected for research, how you're going to use it, and if you are using tools that are supported in your practice, as individuals at this stage, we need to be aware of not putting anything into them that doesn't belong to you. If it's something that's been collected from community, don't put it in there, because you have no control around how it's going to be used. And it's not your information. It belongs to those people. So Um, my thoughts gone. What was the question? Sorry. Policy and legislation. Yes, absolutely. There are different frameworks that we can align ourselves with in relation to data and upholding things like care principles and how it's used, and doing until it catches up, we have to take on that responsibility, I think, ourselves as individuals engaging within research and within this space and advocating where we can for doing things proper ways. Yeah, that's
about, maybe it's not AI so much, but Indigenous data governance. As researchers, we're collecting data all the time. But as communities become more literate about Indigenous data governance, they want to control the data that we've collected. But we've got a responsibility as researchers, ethically, to safeguard that data. And there seems to be a very big gap in the middle about how do we do this? How do we do it? And there's some models that we're trialling now with organisations. But where do we go to in the future? Because as communities become more and more literate about Indigenous data governance and want to have the data that's collected about them for their use, but we're researchers in wide institutions, what do we do in the future?
great. Wouldn't it be great if communities could hold all the data and do all of their research and not use universities to do it for them? I think so. Personally, myself, in the most recent ethics that I did, I really considered Indigenous data sovereignty principles within that and governance of the data, and making sure that there were ways for community who participated in my work to be able to access data as appropriate through requests and governance mechanisms, like considering who they are and whether it's what identified, de-identified data is in place. And I think as researchers, where we can, putting that in to our ethics applications and to our data collections, mechanisms for those who are participating in the research and engaging with the data in community, have a way for them to at the very least, know where that data is held and how to access it, and have processes in place. So does that answer the question?
There's just a comment in the chat here from Antoinette White. To protect our community's data, we also have to overturn some public ideas around who owns the data.
Absolutely. Aligning again, and that's one of the I don't know how to put it in a. One of the considerations around Indigenous data sovereignty in Australia is that it's a rights-based framework, but then there's no, at this point, legality around how to uphold those rights. So Indigenous data governance is really important by having a say around that, and making sure that data that's collected has appropriate metadata on where it's come from, how to access it, how to engage with it. So that's data about data, if you're not sure what I'm talking about there. So being able to identify what is included in the data set, what it's about, where it's from, and how people can go about accessing that data. Yeah.
Okay, that's a lot of deficit approaches there. Let's go to some strengths. Have you come across any communities, Indigenous people, Indigenous businesses, community organisations that are using AI in really novel or amazingly proactive ways, here or overseas?
Some of the examples I had up earlier around like the ranges and the gross nets and the those types of things, I haven't seen so much, and it could just be through my own lack of exploring the use of language models successfully here in Australia. I know there's some work happening around language revitalisation and creation of language models and things like that within communities as well, but I don't have a clear example of a language model, so like ChatGPT or something that's been developed specifically for communities yet. And I'm happy to go and look at one of those if anyone's got a suggestion. Yeah, but things like how I've seen some good examples overseas, being led out of Canada and New Zealand. And I think too that when we talk about AI, what type of AI are we talking about? Because like the identification with drones and things like that is a type of AI, or are we talking about our chat GPTs that are scraping all of our knowledges? Yeah.
That the wall you're kind of heading to is that what we were just saying a moment ago, that when people see AI, we all have different conceptions
Yeah.
of what AI is. Is it AI warfare? Is it AI ChatGPT? Is it AI to look at turtle mating habits?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a big.
It is. It's a really big thing. And it's a very broad term. And I think there really does need to be, this is the type of AI, this is what's happening, because a long time ago, I would have thought more around the robotics side and the drone use. That's what I was thinking of AI. And like, the picture I had back there of, iRobot, where they, Will Smith battled them and, but now when someone says AI, my brain goes straight to ChatGPT. And it has a purpose, but is it the best tool for what it is that we're using it for? So that's, I think, things around different AI literacy and how we're engaging it, and just general awareness around these things is very important. But it's also going to change because it is such a fast moving space as well. But I also do think it's exciting, and I think there is great potential for it to be used in ways, as long as we have a say in how they're developed, how they're used, and what possibilities they might like to be applied in as well. Okay.
As AI becomes more frequently used and encouraged in government, how do you see communities influencing government decision making and policy design that is reflective of their environments, perspectives, and that is empowering?
It's a great question. I don't have the answer to that one, because I think at this point, it's around how we influence government decision making, in all spheres, by making sure we, as a starting point, we have basic AI literacy, we have a seat at the table, we advocate for a seat at the table if we don't have one, and really trying to elevate perspectives and priorities in the AI space. I know that the AI, the national policy, I've forgotten the title now, the one that came out last week. I was actually surprised that it referred to Indigenous data sovereignty. That's the first thing I looked at when I opened the document as I went through, and I said, how is this document impacting our people? What does it say about us? And it did have some references in there, which, was a good first step. And I don't, doesn't say all the things in the document that it should, but had a good first step. Thank you, Melissa. Last call.
Perfect.
Jane.
AI, and we're going to need more and more servers, and then just how we accommodate for the financial cost to cooling all these servers, because we're just going to need more racks and racks and racks and spaces and spaces and spaces to actually collate and for all this information to be dispersed. And I just wonder, what the financial aspect of that is going to be from an environmental perspective and many other avenues, actually. I just wonder whether you had heard anything more along those lines or what the impact would be.
Don't have a specific number of finance, but I know they're considering building data centers and impacts to country, and I think really it's really important that communities are I'm not going to do it. Yes, thank you. For that, loss of country, and making sure, like I said earlier, around the environmental impacts and the ethical impacts. I think they're very muchly interrelated and very important considerations when we start to talk about data centers and talk about how AI models are going to be used, and they have to be considered. I don't think it's in any particular policy that they must do that at the moment, but, blue sky thinking, absolutely include impacts to country, environmental ethics, and in those developments. Yeah. I don't know about desalination, sorry. I know that, like, I mentioned before, renewable water and renewable energy is important to consider within data centers and these impacts to the environment. I'm not a economic expert, sorry, Tamika. But thank you for your question.
Beautiful. We might wrap it up there. I just want to say thank you again to Becky for making time and coming and speaking with us today. We really appreciate your time and your knowledge, and yeah, we're really grateful. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.